This is Carolina Business Review. Major support provided by High Point University, the premier life skills university focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
We are all proud of our alma maters in high school and college. We can just feel it in the air on any given game day or game night. The public college and university system in the Carolinas is not just a model for the country, but also a point of pride. It's an enormous impact. It has an enormous impact on the quality of our lives, on economic development for sure, on our growth in communities, etc., etc. Welcome again, and thank you for supporting the most widely watched and the longest-running dialogue on Carolina business policy and public affairs. North Carolina's UNC System has a proud point of light for the Tar Heel State. It is the first public university in the U.S. That was in 1789, UNC Chapel Hill was chartered. And now, some 235 years on, it includes 16 universities, including the North Carolina School of Science and Math. The system itself has almost 250,000 students enrolled now. And joining us in a moment is the president of the UNC System himself, President Peter Hans. Stay with us.
Major funding also by Foundation for the Carolinas, a catalyst for philanthropy and driver of civic engagement, helping individuals, nonprofits, and companies bring their charitable visions to life. Truliant Federal Credit Union, proudly serving the Carolinas since 1952 by focusing on what truly matters, our members' financial success. Welcome to Brighter Banking. And Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation on which our communities improve and grow. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, an executive profile featuring Peter Hans, president of the University of North Carolina System.
Welcome again to our program. Thank you for joining us. We are honored to have, unfortunately for us, not in the studio, but joining us live from his office in the Triangle. We welcome the UNC System president, Mr. Peter Hans. President Hans, welcome to the program. Nice to see you again, sir.
Always good to see you, Chris, my friend. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. The obvious thing, President Hans, is we are now we are past an election, both a general election that was a long time grinding through this country and certainly in the Carolinas, but also in North Carolina for you, the idea that there's new leadership in the state, both in the governor's office, lieutenant governor, AG, to name just a couple, but also for primary education, there's a new superintendent of education. So, President Hans, you've got some policy experience in not just education, but directly with the Senate in the United States. How do you approach this new political, I hate to say reality, but there is a new political consciousness going on. Does it matter? Does it change any strategic thinking? How does it wash over you, sir?
Well, Chris, I agree. The election has seemed like a grind. It's a very long, expensive, and noisy season. So, like most Americans, I'm thrilled it's over. I will say that the university has been remarkably fortunate over its existence to have maintained bipartisan support for its mission. And regardless of which party wins any particular office, we work with everyone. The University of North Carolina is for all North Carolinians, and we do our very best to stay out of politics. Not so easy. A lot of people want to bring us in, whether it's from the right or from the left. We try to host debates, hopefully well-informed debates, but otherwise stay out of the politics.
And let's talk about that a bit. I'm going to read some statistics, so forgive me for looking down, but a majority of Americans, 57%, distrust post-secondary institutions around education. 68% say that 68% said they're moving in the wrong direction. And according to June 2024, so this past summer, a Gallup poll, the share of Americans who are confident in higher ed dropped by 21 percentage points over the last 10 years. President Hans, how do you, as head of one of the oldest and largest systems in the U.S. and certainly in the Carolinas, how do you be in that system and not of it? How do you keep the idea of being a convener of ideas, and how do you make sure that you're building trust in your own institutions? What's key?
I think to be thoughtful about our engagement with leaders from both parties, and as I said, all North Carolinians, staying free of taking positions on domestic and foreign policy questions that really it's not the university's place to have an official position on, because again, we're here to serve all North Carolinians. But you have mentioned one of the significant headwinds that higher education nationally is facing, and that is a declining level of support for higher education. I believe it's tied to, one, politics, and two, perceptions about cost. And I think I've mentioned our response to the first, which is to stay out of politics, just not align the university with, as I like to joke, Republicans, Democrats, libertarians, vegetarians. We welcome them all. So that's the first headwind. The second headwind is the perception of cost, because there is this very strong national narrative about the rising cost of university education. And it's a worthwhile debate, because there are plenty of examples of where students have taken on too much debt and they've questioned what they've received in return. The University of North Carolina has been very fortunate, thanks to the support of its citizens and what I consider to be fiscal responsibility on our part. We've been able to keep tuition flat for in-state residents the last 8 years, soon to be 9 years running. There's no other state in the nation that can make that claim. So I'm seeking to sharpen our value proposition and push back against that national narrative about higher education. North Carolina wants to be the counterexample to ever escalating costs and too much politics.
You know, early returns show that you're certain, not just early returns, but as you said, the last 8 years on the tuition levels. Before we get into that, and I do want to unpack fiscally more about the university system and how it works, but the idea, and just one final question on the idea around trust and public trust. When you witnessed, as we all have, some of the debate, specifically we use the Israeli-Palestinian issue in many schools, and it got not just violent, but beyond violent. How, I guess, President Hans, how do you approach allowing universities as the place for, as a public square and public debate, but how do you keep an eye, and how do you run the idea that it needs to be secure and it also needs to be respectful? How do you do that without running afoul of personal liberties?
Well, it's very challenging, Chris, but we actually have a pretty clear and consistent set of guidelines where we encourage and embrace free speech on the part of all students and our staff and faculty and citizens in the community. We want that. That's a hallmark of any higher education institution, but it is subject to time, place, and manner restrictions. So it must be a civil dialogue where all points of view are respected. It must be in a time, place, and manner that we can protect anyone attending, and that people are not subject to violations of intimidation or harassment. And so to be able to do all those things at once is challenging. Free speech, civil dialogue, and make sure that it does not drift off into a situation where people are harassed or there is the threat of any violence against any individual. And when passions run so strongly, as they do most recently, we've seen with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it can be a challenge. And yet, that's what receives the media attention. We've had countless examples of where we have had very positive dialogue on college campuses across the state to better inform our students and people in the community about the complexity of that situation. This is a thousands of years old conflict in the Middle East. We won't resolve it in North Carolina, but we can help our students be better informed about it.
Let's get to the balance sheet and the income statement for the university. And you just said that there's, and agreed, and statistically, there's tuition levels at your system is steady state. Pretty amazing, actually. And I'm not just pandering, sir, but it is pretty amazing over 8 years. And as you said, 9 years now, no tuition increases. But yet you have increase in students enrollment. Another amazing thing. So how do you responsibly manage a large enterprise like the UNC System, not raise tuition, but do it all in the face of some pretty epic price increases that we've all seen the last few years?
Well, we're all feeling the inflationary pressures, certainly. But there's always an opportunity with an enterprise this large to become more efficient in our operations so that we can support the academic mission. That's an ongoing effort. Secondly, again, we are so fortunate that we have received on a bipartisan basis for so many years strong support from the people of North Carolina through their elected representatives. North Carolina is in the top 5 states in the country in supporting higher education on a per capita basis. And 2 of the states that we trail are so small that it's really not a fair comparison. So we're incredibly fortunate to maintain that support across all sectors of North Carolinians.
Could you use more money from the General Assembly? Would it be important for growth?
Well, Chris, I would say there are always opportunities for the university to expand its offerings in ways that help educate more North Carolinians or promote more research to improve the quality of life in North Carolina and around our country and around the world, and support various public service efforts. So I think it's contingent upon us to prove to our elected representatives that we run a fiscally responsible operation so that they do feel the confidence to keep investing.
Mr. President, what kind of internal, and without giving up any confidence, I'm not looking for that, but what kind of internal document or discussions do you have about this performance-based model approach and the idea that you look at the product of a school, our credentials and degrees, and how do you allocate funds toward those higher ROI or return on investment models, and how do you make sure that it's done democratically?
And thank you for asking me that, Chris, because it's a little revolutionary for higher education, certainly not for the private sector, but to gauge performance and determine where we're going to make investments. Additionally, how I am compensated, how our chancellors are compensated. The funding formula for the universities itself is partially determined by our ability to improve performance on key metrics like improving the graduation rate and lowering student debt, goals that I think every North Carolinian can support. So we've tied my compensation, the chancellor's compensation, and funding for the universities themselves to demonstrating ongoing improvements in performance in those areas. And I say it's a little bit out of the box for higher education. It makes some people nervous. It's certainly more of a private sector model, But the better we are at moving the needle, the greater the value for our students and the citizens in North Carolina.
Did it take a while to convince the chancellors and the presidents of each school that this was, not just a heavy hand coming down from the triangle, but this worked?
Well, no one has the zealousness of the converted, and I believe the chancellors have converted to this model. Yes, I think, in fairness to them, they have largely embraced the idea because it's pretty fundamental. Improve your performance, and you'll be rewarded for it. So I think they have had occasional challenges on their campus to bring people along. But I will say it's going well, and we are improving performance as a result. We're so fortunate in North Carolina, as you pointed out. Enrollment is up, retention is up, graduation is up. Our public support is strong, private support is strong financially. Research numbers continue to grow across the system, and yet student debt levels are down. Tuition is flat. We're executing in the areas that the people of North Carolina want us to.
Let's come to current day. In the last 45 days, obviously, we have all witnessed some pretty epic, and you could even say biblical proportion type of problems in Western North Carolina and the upstate of South Carolina. Of course, acts of God, natural disasters. So for the schools, what are some of your observations, and how? And again, I hate to ask a clinical question, sir, but how does that impact your budgeting, and does it impact the strategic thinking for you going forward for maybe further natural disasters that may come in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's true, Chris. We're used to dealing with hurricanes down east, not so much in the mountains, and I'm from the mountains. So I feel this one particularly close to my heart. It's been heartbreaking to see the loss of life, and some places that hold such a strong place in my heart. So I've taken that rather emotionally, but our institutions have fared relatively well given the severity of the flooding. Western Carolina was actually largely spared in Cullowhee because the storm and the flooding was largely to the east of there. UNC Asheville was closed for nearly a month, largely as a result of the city's water supply issues. We now have, thanks to the Army Corps of Engineers, mobile water treatment facility on campus, so that we were able to get UNC Asheville back up and running. The most damage actually occurred at Appalachian State in Boone, and yet they're mountain strong in high country, and they have managed their way through it at each of these institutions, and we are looking forward to playing our role in the recovery of Western North Carolina.
I just want to promote coming up, since you gave me that opportunity there, President Hans, coming up on this program, actually. Justin Powell is the South Carolina Secretary of the Department of Transportation, and we'll not just talk about what they're doing for infrastructure in South Carolina, but what they're doing looking ahead. And also, Harry Sedaris is the president of Duke Energy, and to say that they are busy restoring and rebuilding is a gross understatement. We will talk to President Sedaris about that rebuilding effort, the cost to citizens, the cost to communities, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're just joining us now, we have joining us from his office in the Triangle, President Hans from the UNC System. President Hans, let me come back to something you said when we talk about the impact on the schools in Western North Carolina. I'm sure, given knowing you, but also the system, that there's a sensitivity to not having school in session for a month. Do parents ask for some type of acknowledgement or recourse when it comes to tuition? And how do you budgetarily meet the needs of parents or those who pay those tuition costs, still with a nod to that, but also to the nod that you have a budget that you have to be sensitive to?
Well, so true, Chris. Again, we've been very fortunate. The legislature has appropriated some funds that we are putting forward towards those institutions, clearly in terms of repairing their facilities, and FEMA will support with cleaning up the debris and reimburse us for some of that. There's insurance for part of that, but the legislature has provided money for students who are from Western North Carolina or attending Western North Carolina universities to lighten their load, given the stress on them financially and emotionally. Additionally, the system, through the State Education Assistance Authority, was able to free up about $8 million that we could spend on behalf of students at Western Carolina, UNC Asheville, and App State, whose families qualify for the next NC scholarship, that is with family incomes below $80,000, some direct financial aid to those students. We're looking at how we can reduce or even waive tuition at UNC Asheville in the spring semester, because again, the damage done to the city of Asheville and ongoing issues with the water supply, we're concerned about losing students there. We want to retain them and keep them on track to graduate.
We have about 5 minutes left, and artificial intelligence burst onto the scene, at least in a public way, in the last 2 years, although it's been around for a while, the technology and certainly the practice of it. And it's a bit interesting that some of the first first news reports were about students using artificial intelligence to write papers and to maybe not do all of their coursework. Surprise, surprise. But President Hans, how profound is AI going to mean to the delivery of higher ed, degreeing, credentials, beyond student use of AI? What does it mean for a system like UNC?
Chris, we're still trying to get our arms around that very question. I will say we've got some incredibly bright data scientists and faculty in related fields that are helping us do that right now. The challenge for me, I think, as more of a layperson, is the rapidly evolving nature of artificial intelligence, so that ways that we might utilize that technology today seem nearly obsolete a month, much less 6 months or a year from now. And so clearly students are ahead of the curve, as they normally are, those agile young brains, in terms of figuring out how to help them write papers. Professors are certainly utilizing AI to check for plagiarism from those papers, of course. So there are some basic uses there, but we're trying to think about the use of AI in our operations. Again, always looking at being as efficient as possible, so any savings that we can achieve can be reinvested in the academic mission of the university system.
We've got 2 minutes left, and I want to ask you this question. It's not meant to be flippant or sophomoric, no pun intended, but the idea of name, image, and likeness, and that is the impact on the sports programs at many schools. You could argue that Coach Saban said that he quit Alabama because of some of that influence. How strategic are you and your leadership around what money is doing to change the sports programming and directly affecting college players?
Yes, tremendous challenges in college athletics today, and it's unfortunate. Athletics are the front porch of the university. So many people access the university in that way, become fans of any particular school. So we have generally delegated athletics to the campuses from the system level until more recently, when it has become a very clinical term here, perhaps sophomoric. It's a mess. It's just a big mess right now.
We have 30 seconds, so sorry.
And to the NIL question in particular, it's good for the players, obviously, those student athletes, to be able to be compensated for their talents and skills, but very difficult for the schools When they get a great player, some larger program is going to come pick them off with more money.
Yeah, that's simply said. And not completely fair that I dropped that one in your lap with, oh, by the way, can you wrap it up in 60 seconds? But
That's a longer answer. Let's have a whole program about college athletics. It's very interesting.
Oh, I can only imagine. President Hans, thank you for taking time. We always enjoy hosting you, but you're always so gracious about challenges ahead, and we expect that you will continue to do that. Thank you for your leadership, and I hope you continue well into the fall, sir. Thank you.
I appreciate you very much, Chris.
Thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, Truliant Federal Credit Union, Foundation for the Carolinas, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, High Point University, and by viewers like you. Thank you.